Hey guys, we're going to work through lesson 9. My goal is 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3. I'm going to be pausing at certain times just to let you kind of work, and then you can come back in and check your work as you go. So for the first part, rewrite each of the following time lengths in terms of years. Express your answer in decimal form. So from here, this would be potentially a calculator active activity if you want. Go ahead and hit pause and try to work through as many as you can. So hopefully you worked through most of these without a problem. It's probably easiest to look at some of the ones you know as in decimal form in the beginning. So 6 out of 12 months of the year leaves you with half of a year, or the decimal 0.5. For 9 months, same idea, 9 out of 12 is 0.75. 12 months out of 12 months is 1 year. 18 months, 18 out of 12. It's improper, but in decimal form, it's 1.5 years. And then 36 months would be 3 years. For 1 month, whenever you put that in your calculator, 1 divided by 12, you'll see that you get a repeating decimal. So we'll actually write it in proper form with putting the repeater bar over the 3. That one's definitely not the prettiest. So hopefully you wrote yourself a rule for doing this. So to change it from months to months from years, you would actually says write yourself a rule for changing time in months 2 times in years. You would just divide by 12. And you're going to use this in the next activity. So I'm moving on to the next page, which should be page 54. Following her birthday party, Jada counted up $400 in money she received in gifts. Her mom let her keep $100 to spend and then made her put the rest into a savings account for college. Her local bank offered 4.5% annual interest rate. So the first thing they want you to do is to recognize a couple of the vocabulary words. Anytime that you have a beginning deposit, that's going to be called your principal. A principal is going to be the initial amount that you borrow, the initial amount that you, you might invest into something. So principal is like your beginning amount. Your interest rate has to be put in as a decimal. So if I have 4.5%, I'm going to swoop it left twice. And then anytime that you are going to find your length of investment, that's going to be in years. So you multiply across 300 times 0.045% times 1 is going to be 13.5. So that's going to be your interest earned. So now's a good time to, and then, well, let me back up. To find your end balance, you would start with whatever you start with, and then you would add to it. So whenever you're talking about interest, if you have a savings account, your savings account, the bank allows you to earn money on your savings account because then they use your money to loan out to other people. So if you buy a car or buy a house and you don't have enough money, you borrow money from the bank and you actually pay the bank back interest for borrowing their money. And you end up paying a much higher interest rate than they would give you for putting your money into a savings account. But talk to your parents, see if you guys have these loans or these accounts where you earn money for them. See how many your family may have, and maybe you have some that you don't even know about. So if we were to do this, or if Jada was to keep her $300 in the account for 2 years, you would do the exact same thing. Now, if you think about it, really, if it was $13.50 for 1 year, it should be $13.50 for the next year. If you multiply these 3 numbers across, you're going to get $27. So my initial $300, I earned $27 on it. I'm going to have $327. Whoops, that decimal should be right there. Take a moment and fill in your chart. Please press pause and come back in when you're ready. Hopefully you took a minute and filled in your chart. I have filled in mine. One thing that you can kind of notice in the first 4 rows is we're just adding $13.50 each year. So how much does she earn per year? $13.50. What is really helpful is to have some sort of way to figure out how much she would earn if it doesn't just jump by 1 like it did in the first 4 rows. So it comes to the 5th row where it's 10. So do you have to figure out the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th year, or keep adding $13.50, or can you just multiply straight across? So what they want you to do is to write an equation that can be used to calculate interest. So if I think about what I have up here, I have interest, which is our I, equals the 3 things we multiplied: principal times the rate times the time. This is going to be our formula that we use. This is for simple interest only. Simple interest is when you only earn money on your initial deposit or your initial amount borrowed. There's another type of interest that's definitely more real world called compound interest, where you earn interest based off what you started with and on the interest you earn. But we're keeping it with the simple interest. The thing to remember is that your rate has to go in as a decimal, and then your time has to go in as years. So if they provide you with time in terms of months, you need to convert it to years, which is why we did that beginning exercise. Make sure that you've written that formula down because we're going to use that in the next activity. And I am going to skip the next page, page 55, and move right to 56. So for 9.4, things are getting interesting. Use the simple interest formula, I equals PRT, to solve the missing value in the following equations. I'm probably going to do 1 or 2 of these with you and then have you go back and see if you can figure out the last 2. So for number 1, a bank offers a simple interest rate of 2%. So there's my rate, my R, and I'm going to go ahead right above it and write it into decimal form. Remember, the decimal has to swoop left twice. It's really just dividing by 100. For deposits of $500 to $1,000, how long would it take an $800 deposit? So this is going to be my principal, to earn $48 in interest. So here's my I. So this is a formula. They've given us 4 different variables. We always are going to be missing 1. In this case, it looks like we're missing time. So my I is $48. So I'm going to put I, P times R times T. My I was 48. My principal is the initial amount I deposit, which is add, or it could be an amount I borrow, times the rate, 0.02. I'm just going to put my 0 there so I can keep the multiplication and decimal separate. Oh, and I don't have my time. So from here, it's a pretty simple equation. I'm going to multiply 800 times 0.02, and I get 16. So 48 equals 16 times t, and then to get t, I have to divide by 16. So when I do 48 divided by 16, I would get 3. So in this case, it would be 3 years because my time comes out as years. For number 2, you borrowed $600 to purchase a new musical instrument. The rate on the loan was 10%. So I'm going to go back real quick. Borrowed this much, that is your principal. The rate was 10%, so there's my R, and I'm going to write it as a decimal. If it took you 5 years to pay, so there's my time, and I gave it to me in years, so I don't have to do any conversions. How much did it take, or how much did you have to pay for the loan in total? So remember, you have to find that word total and think, okay, that means I have to pay the initial $600 plus what they're going to charge me in interest. So if I plug everything in, I'm still going to use the formula, interest equals principal times rate times time. I don't know how much interest, but I know I borrowed $600 at a rate of 10% over 5 years. And if I multiply that, I get 300. So keep in mind, this is only my interest right now. I'm paying an additional $300 just in interest. So if I have to pay back, I don't just pay them back the $300. I have to pay them back for the actual instrument. So 600 plus 300 is equal to 900. This is called a balance. So in other words, you're going to hear eventually is the word balance. A balance is what you started with plus, any additional that you may owe. I'm going to go ahead and do number 3 with you. A $1,000 loan ended up costing you $1,275 once you paid back the loan and interest. So if you think about this, they're telling you that this is the total. I'm going to use that word balance, but it is just a total, which this includes your principal and your interest combined. So this $1,000 loan, that's going to be your principal. The rate on your loan was 5%. So if I think about my equation, I equals principal times rate times time. I know my principal was 1,000. I know my rate was 5%, but I don't know time. And I also don't know interest in terms of it wasn't explicitly given to me. However, I do know if I started by borrowing 1,000 and then I had to pay back 1,275, the difference is the interest. So I had to pay $275 in interest. From here, I would go ahead and multiply it out. So I'm going to do 1,000 times 0.05, which if I think about 1,000, that's just swooping the decimal 1, 2, 3 times. That would make it 50. So 275 equals 50t. Divide by 50. 275 divided by 50. And I get 5.5. So my time comes up as 5.5. You could say 5.5 years. If they said to convert it to years and months, it would be 5 years and 6 months. Take a moment and do number 4. All right, and hopefully you were able to kind of pick out all the information. I found the rate, I found the interest, and I found the time. I just had to solve for P. So I filled it in, I simplified those 2 factors and divided both sides by 45 thousandths, and I got $350 was my principal.